probably know me. We have met in previous seminars, so thank you for your participation. I've just started in the University of Parma to work as a researcher, so I'm just welcoming my colleagues. They are connecting and are connected, and I'm still working with the UNESCO SIM project for the Insight project. And with this project, we are organizing these series of webinars among these. This is the 5th webinar of a series of 6 webinars. Today, we're going to talk about the cultural linguistic mediation. And the last one will be the 30th of November in a few weeks. About begging. Apart from the webinars, we are producing documents with this project connecting to the site. You can find 5 documents and publications that are really a summary of all our researches. And of course, for any question, you are free to ask anything you want, or you can write to us in order to have more pieces of information. As I was saying, today we're going to talk about cultural linguistic mediation. That was not one of the topic of the project, but because, it was not among the research activities, but because we realized it was a very important topic, we decided to study this project, this topic with researchers. We had an activity, a training activity, and one of our guests is going to talk about this. So the objective of today is to talk to you about the results of our research about the specific topic of cultural linguistic mediation. I have Gianfranco Bonesso here that worked with us with the Insight project. Serena Scarabello, Gianfranco Boris, who is anthropologist. He is an expert of migrations. He has been working for years on cultural, social-cultural mediation. And then we will have Devisri Nambia, is an expert of cultural linguistic mediation, social legal professional of the Navigare project for the Equality Cooperative. And we have Lorenzo Lugatti by Oxfam Italia. He is a researcher of the migration processes and intercultural relations. Is one of the most important experts, I think I can say that, about cultural linguistic mediation. We're very happy to have here all the experts to talk to us and with us. I just want to add a couple of things before just moving on with the presentation of our results. So a couple of remarks, and Lorenzo and the other colleagues are going to deepen the topic in case you're not familiar with the topic of mediation, or let's say mediation in Italy at least. I'd like to start with a general definition that is using a definition of the European Council of 2011. According to this definition, mediation is a complex role and polyhedric role where mediator, woman or man, are an important third party cultural agent or intermediary among a person, a community, and an agent, an institution. So we have the linguistic approach on one side with interpretation, translation, and then the cultural mediation that is focused more on anthropological and sociological aspects. And we have 4, let's say, main levels. So the information communication level, or orientation level, then we have a linguistic and communication level, then we have the cultural intercultural level, and then we have psychosocial relational level. I was very, very brief, but I just wanted to give you a general understanding or general reference, and we will go back to this later on. Having said that, I'll start with my first slide. Let's see if I can share it with you. Let's start with a very brief introduction about the methodology of the research for this part on the cultural linguistic mediation. As I said, we are inside the Inside project on the trafficking from Nigeria toward Europe, Italy, and Sweden in particular. And in this project, we have done interviews to mediators and policemen, policewomen, social workers, so different persons that are working inside this anti-trafficking system or cooperating with the anti-trafficking system in Veneto for the social protection in general. So we have done these interviews after 1 year of observation in the anti-trafficking project in Veneto. So we just stay there day after day, almost every day, next to the mediators to observe their activities. Then we organized a focus group in September 2020 with mediators of the NAVE project in order to talk about this topic. So the profiles of the participants and the focus group to give you a general idea. So women 8 out of 9 coming from different areas, mainly Nigeria, but other countries, Albania, Romania, Maghreb, and Cameroon. And I underline Nigeria because if you do not know, our project focused really on young Nigerian women. That was our main target. So going back to the profile of the participant of the focus group, we had mediators with 4 up to 20 years of experience, some of them in the anti-trafficking sector, in other sectors as well, so school, health system, anti-violence centers, prisons, and so on and so forth. And we will see something more about this later on. I'll just give the floor to Gianfranco to explain to us the meaning of just doing mediation, working as a mediator. Here I am. So welcome to you all. I'd like to underline that what we are saying are really the emerging things or the things that we have heard in this focus group. But let's start right away to say what is mediation. So from what we have heard in our group, in the focus group, we have 3 keywords that we know. The one with the stronger roots, so language, culture, and relation. So from the general definitions, general definitions are different. So these 3 elements are present at the same time. So in the majority of the mediation, we really need to use linguistic knowledge, cultural knowledge, and also the ability to have relations with other people. To do what? First of all, to communicate. This level was, let's say, the one that was most underlined by the participant, but also allow the others to feel good. You can communicate properly. You can create a relationship, creating this good environment to understand the one you have in front of you and to be understood. And then we have other very specific terms that we will see are really connected to the anti-trafficking systems of fixing. So our friends, the mediators, so they were saying that most of the time people are shattered. They have difficulties to just maintain all the pieces together, so they need to fix them in a metaphorical way to strengthen so the empowerment, to give strength to people that in this case, in the traffic, they are the most vulnerable they've lived traumatic experiences to rebuild. Once again, this topic, this word as fixing, is about the pieces of men and women, their history, to find really agreement in a negotiation and to help to make a decision in a very important phase when these women and men, they had to rebuild their individual projects. How do we do that? So the focus group underlined some features and characteristics that we know are fundamental. So listen, but also respect. They did underline the idea to respect the women and men, to allow them to feel that they are worthy, because in their previous lives they were not considered worthy. And of course, it's important to build a proper setting to create a relationship and to choosing locations, times, and modalities, and empathy, of course. So to stay near, to recognize these women and men, and trust that we need to give to these women and men, and to create something that is fundamental if you want to have a relationship with them. Of course, with whom? With women in the anti-trafficking project, women and men inside, so the victims of the trafficking. And then another element that we have seen in the focus with the operators or the social workers and all those that are involved in the project. Let's have a look. So the self-representation, so not something that is understandable, cognitive, rational. So what about how they self-represented themselves with images, some quite original, others quite useful. So the bridge is really a normal image, so a bridge among two persons, two realities. Another important element is a facilitator. So the mediator is considering himself or herself a facilitator in the path in the life of the victims of the trafficking. And then we have these images like fixing, so the mechanics that is really fixing the pieces. And then another element that was quite used, so someone that is able to allow the other to feel good. So it's impossible to be a drone, something mechanic, something automatic that see things but without feeling anything. And then other two elements that somewhat really showed how they self-represented themselves. So to be a guide, the mediators are adults are really guiding, or teachers as well. So someone linked to transmitting knowledge. And then to finish, one last metaphor that some of the mediators offered. So someone that observes and accompanies as if the victim of the trafficking were a pregnant woman, so needing a specific proper care, needing someone to stay there next to her, something that maybe in other circumstances are not necessary. So do we have specific features in mediation, in the trafficking? So most of the mediators, they do have experience in other sectors, and they underlined these specific points for the trafficking. The first one, emergency situations. So you need to work and to offer what you have seen in a different, difficult situation with no time at all to work and very few pieces of information. You know almost nothing about what you should do, and also the risk, the possibility of risk for the victims of the trafficking. And then there is another element, very, very strong. So the mediation is done with victims of the human rights, so breaches of human rights is something very evident. So they are victims. That's the term that we use more often, victims, and they are suffering and they are running a lot of risks. So suffering and risk are the elements that they transmit somewhat to the mediator, this burden that the mediator need to really to bear is there. And then there is another important fundamental element, that is, there is a group of people with a specific gender. For the trafficking, sexual trafficking, mainly we have female victims, and also generation, so the age category of young women and men that are inside, they are victim of this system. And then the generation, the age is also important in the relationship with the mediators. So all these groups have changed during the years. So the next element is change in profiles. So we have mediators with 20 years of experience, and they have seen lots of changes with more and more complex profiles. So let's imagine the migrants of 20 years ago, and also the migrations that are sort of via cruises from Africa arriving in Europe right now. So just living in Libya and then arriving in Italy or in Europe, where the really criminal organizations with the different branches, the different organizations that we have here in Libya and in Europe. Another fundamental element that maybe in other mediations is not so central. Well, I mean, it's important, but not so paramount. It's just building trust. So these victims are trying to escape a situation, a very serious situation, a prison, if you will. So the trafficking, I mean, is just slavery in a certain sense. So we need to build this trust with those that accompany you to escape this prison. And this is fundamental. The last two elements that we can really link are these two. So the legal aspects, so everything that has changed in the legal definition of the trafficking and the possibility, legal possibility of people or the victims to be recognized by the government, being recognized socially and also being recognized with international protection, special cases, and so on and so forth. So everything, all this has an impact on the type of mediation. And the mediator, of course, needs to know in order to understand where, in which phase the victim, the person is. And then to finish, another element is really the position of the mediator considering the religious beliefs that can really have an influence, and also the dramatic past of all these women and men inside the trafficking. So with these two phenomena, how the mediator is able really to tackle these, so believing, not believing, and creating a protection, a shelter for the victims of trafficking that they are accompanying.
Okay, grazie Gianfranco.
Okay, Michele, we can go ahead. Thank you, Gianfranco. So let's go ahead from where you left in order to go deeper into details with some of the aspects that we found out with our interviews, not only with mediators, but also with other operators and social workers which were involved within the social protection system. Considering that we also have some participants from the UK, from Nigeria, and from non-Italian countries, please do not hesitate to ask questions if something is not clear, because the system is very complex, also for us as Italians. So it's very complex to translate, not only literally translate, but also to explain how it works in details about this system. So talking about the anti-trafficking system in the region Veneto, and generally speaking in Italy as well, we shall start by saying that the setting plays a key role, because people involved in the social protection system is actually working in diversified settings according to the different stages of the project. What does it mean? It means that we are dealing, and you have to work with several different people, several different contexts. Generally speaking, dealing with situations that involve very delicate emotions, very dramatic situations, as Gianfranco was saying, and also dangerous situations, because we are talking about people that very often are still running the risk of being exploited, and often they are still within the exploitation circuit. So they have the risk to get back to that situation, and that's a very dangerous situation also for the operators and for the mediators. So we shouldn't forget then, when talking about the setting, also the aspect that we found out with our interviews, which is the role played by the bureaucratic timing. So what does it mean? Well, it means that the project has a specific length, a specific timeline, even though they're often then delayed when needed according to the needs of the people involved. But despite this expected deadline, often there are clashes with the biographical timeline of people, and this is very important if we consider, for example, the preparation for the intercultural committee. So the demand for asylum seekers, for example, this requires to share and explain personal histories and backgrounds, which is often very dramatic, very complex, and it's often hard to share that with other people like the mediators, the operators, and also with the authorities and the local committees. And people have to explain and tell their history, and it may take a while because it will involve a very complex path. And all the stages of the protection path are variable, because not all people follow the stages at the same time and the same way. So generally speaking, they start with the first contact stage, where the operator has to deal with the risk, with the danger, with the fears as well of people still involved in this exploitation circuit and network. Then there is also the law. There are also the law enforcement that are involved, and we all know that they don't have a good trust relationship with the people involved in this trafficking circuit, this trafficking network. Then there are the reception communities, which are the context where the people spend a lot of time. That's their daily routine, basically their daily life. And then there is another further context which involves social workers and all the operators going together with these people for their training, for their learning process about the language, for example, learning Italian. And do not forget also the very important aspect concerning all the world outside the project of social protection, because at the end of this social protection project, there is all a community that usually shall try to support and help these people, because this involves the community, which will play a key role for to find a job, for example, or to find an accommodation, a house, in order to go ahead with their life in that territory. So these are very, very complex and challenging operations, which involve all a series of skills and know-hows within and outside the social protection project. There's been a huge debate about the lack of links with all the reception system of asylum seekers, generally speaking, but we will get back to that later on about this topic. And that's important also, the huge coordination level outside the anti-trafficking level, but also within the anti-trafficking level. And the question is how to coordinate all these actions, how to facilitate and organize a teamwork, and what is the positioning and the position of the mediators within this team, within this equipe. What we found out with our interviews from the side of the mediators is a very strong challenge, a very important challenge. On the one hand, from the acknowledgement of their own role, which is variable from one operator to another, despite the importance played by the team working. So they actually recognize the importance of working as a team, but they have this need to be more independent in order to say and state that they are not only the people that are translating, but they are the people that shall contribute to the final decision together with these people they are working with. So the question is also who shall adapt? Usually mediators answered, well, we are the ones that shall adapt to the other people and not the other way. So there is a lack of coordination from this point of view for this teamwork. And another very important aspect, in my opinion, is the institutional culture. Because often we talk about linguistic and cultural mediators as a person that help us to understand different cultures, talking about the culture of the beneficiaries, of the people involved. And it's interesting to see how they are very important, these people, these mediators, in order to understand also the institutional culture. So how is the system working? How is the anti-trafficking system working? What is their institutional role, and what can we do as mediators and in this relationship with the people for which we are working? And last but not least, the last topic, not involving only the anti-trafficking system, is the relationship with the diaspora. So all the contacts with the origin community, with the origin country of these people, but also the contacts in the country where these people are living, in the EU or in other countries as well. And here we can add many further things, because we have not been able to go deep into details about this topic, but it's important because it's a very challenging topic. Let me just name an example. For example, when you talk about mediators that collaborate, for example, with the police, force, this may mean for these people not be accepted by your own community, for example. Or again, when you take part in religious events, you may again not be very well accepted by your community. So it's a very, very challenging and delicate position. And let's now move on to another aspect, which was very important for us. And that's to say, to see the feedback from the people involved in the project. So the stakeholders, the main protagonists of this project. So at the end of our research, we decided together with the operators that welcomed us in their office and in their working space, we decided to interview about 20 Nigerian women which were involved in the Insight project. Of course, for all of you that know the interviewing technique, of course, you all know that this is just a picture, a screenshot of a limited period. So we're talking about September 2020, after the lockdown period, and just before the new restrictions, so still in the pandemic period, and we're talking about people that we met just a few times during our research work and mainly during these interviews. So these are just this is just an overview and the picture of this situation, and they shall be perceived and considered in this way only, and considering also our role as a third party for sure, but also as people involved in the anti-trafficking system. So what did we find out from these interviews? Well, we found out that the majority of the women that we interviewed told us that the mediation was very, very useful at the beginning of their integration path. And first of all, for a linguistic reason, not only linked to the translation from English, but also for the pidgin importance. So the need to talk in the most familiar language. So the language they felt more at ease to talk. And some women also stressed the importance to rely on a mediator coming from the same origin country, because they had this feeling that they were better understood. So the cultural aspect played a key role as well. And very interesting to notice how many women said that the presence of the mediator is not that pleasant at the end, it's not that good at the end of the project. Why? Well, at the end of the project, according to what these people told us, these women told us, and let me also stress the fact that the majority of the women we interviewed were at the end of their project, or they just finished the project. And at that stage, it is clear that they want to claim, they want to say they have been able to succeed by themselves. They are learning Italian, they no longer need a mediator. So the mediator is perceived as something annoying at that point. Then they stressed the importance and the aspect of the relationship, not only with the mediators, but also with operators, with all the operators, generally speaking. And then it's interesting to see how in a few cases they also told us that it was important to rely on a woman mediator, because in that case, they felt more at ease to talk about women topics, so sexual topics or women topics. So the gender played a key role as well. And as we were saying during our previous webinar last October, it doesn't mean that the gender of the social worker is always a negative topic when we're talking about men, because in some cases, men are considered in a very positive way. But it's important to stress that men and women can play different roles according to specific situations. So as I was saying, the interaction with mediators coming from the same origin country is perceived as a positive aspect, because they have this feeling of being better understood, but in some cases, there is this fear of being judged. And this is not something new for mediation, generally speaking. It's important so to develop a real trust with these people. And many of the women we interviewed recalled how during their first meetings with the mediators, they had this feeling of lacking, missing the trust, because they perceived their translation was not a literal translation. And it was interesting to notice that and to see this answer, because very often we say that translation is not just a literal translation, but the mediation requires something more actually. So it's interesting to see and to notice how in these cases there was not a literal translation, and how the people being translated actually didn't like this aspect. And another very interesting aspect is the relationship linked to the intensity of the frequentation. So meaning that the fact of having points of reference, so contacts that you can, for example, phone, you can ask for help and support. And these are the people which were more present in the life of these women we interviewed. Another very interesting aspect in a few cases, in a couple of cases, a couple of women we interviewed described their mediators as a sort of model. So in some specific moments of their integration process, where it was to be decided where to move these women, for example, from a community to another, the experience of the mediator has been very important for them, because for these very young women, they thought, well, if these mediators succeeded, I can do that as well. So just to make an example, in one case, this woman was supposed to move from a big city to a much smaller village. And the first feeling, the first feedback of this woman was not positive, because she felt like being abandoned in a marginalized area. But talking with a mediator that actually was living in a small village, she understood that this was not negative to move in a smaller village. So last but not least, the importance of the mediation within the reception communities. So the fact that some reception communities relied on mediators meant having the possibility to face challenges, conflicts, and misunderstandings, which are often present at the beginning of this process. So this is very important as well. Let me conclude very quickly before leaving the floor to Debbie by reading, as an idea for the debate later on, what are the questions that are still open from our point of view. So first of all, the professional position for mediators within the anti-trafficking system, and generally speaking, within about the team working with them, the acknowledgement of their role as well, the management of these challenges that is for sure very important in terms of timelines and deadlines. The juridical aspect, so the juridical framework and how important it is from a legal point of view to consider the status of these people. And last but not least, their origin country. So what does it mean to be mediator after 10 years of 20 years that you left your country? How can you have always updated your knowledge about your culture, about your origin country, and what is from this point of view, the role of these people? Let me now leave the floor to Debbie. Debbie?
So thank you. Thank you, Michela. Thank you, Gianfranco. Thank you to those listening to us, participating in this session. I'll try to be quite brief in order to just give you the space for the debate, starting from what we have just all heard about the role of this professional figure. So we talk a lot about these mediators, but it's still quite a confused profession. So we do not have a clear idea. I'll start from what we said before, talking about the inside the project. So there's training for cultural linguistic mediators that can work in project against anti-trafficking or against trafficking. So we started to create this project with a working group, and all the colleagues that are following us, starting from some knowledge or some assumptions, so the need of training, so the points where we needed on which we needed to work more and with whom. So first of all, this training course involved mediators that have been working for years in anti-trafficking and exploitation, with mediators without this kind of experience or an experience in other sectors, and mediators that were really information in order to be able to work in different contexts. We had also operators, women and men, belonging to different phases of the project. So operators the content phase, so those that are trying to create a contact or enter into contact with potential victims of exploitation. So operators, they are working with trying to identify these victims of exploitation. And then the inclusion operator. So in this group, we start to reason again on some crucial aspects. So the program of this training course, of course, we had an introduction about the legal frame, and we said that it is central, really paramount for this kind of actions, and it's very important for the mediators to be able to understand fully and properly the legal status of the person they are trying to help, at least in general, to follow them, to help them as much as possible. And then we had also a part linked to the evolutions. So we were talking about times that is changing, the evolution of these, migrants that really have changed and evolved. And so the situations have changed in the years, as all those that really work in the trafficking and exploitation, they needed to be updated constantly. So we needed really to analyze changes, new phenomena, and then we studied also with Ivan Sanier. So the new laws on the, let's say, sort of slavery in the fields. And we talk about activism and how activism can really bring about changes. It was really an enriching path for these mediators. So we talk about this legal recruitment in the fields. We work on the institutional culture, as Michela said before, that of trying to work on different languages, different jargons that really belong to a specific culture. So we need to have a mediation, a sort of translation, if you will. And of course, the mediators, they need to do so as well. They are really at the forefront of that. then one morning was dedicated to the anthropological and psychological aspects with Natale Losi. And it was really interesting to see how mediators and operators there, they try to interpret the meaning of some religious aspects, some, how can I say, or their position towards some cultural aspects in interacting with other mediators and with the victims. And it is something that we saw also in the focus group as a very interesting and important aspect. And then to finish, the last two sessions, the last two meetings were dedicated to experiences, so sort of interchange. We talk about specific experiences. We organize a role play game. So I think it's important during this meeting. I mean, there are some elements that we should share here, and that they were underlined, as I was saying before, during the training course. Because we work with different professionals that work in the different settings. So the fact of organizing the course with operators coming from different roles and mediators, both women and men. I mean, at the beginning, we wondered if it was the case, but then now we believe it was the right choice to mix all these professionals together. For example, it is important to really build together this knowledge of mediators, starting from the mediators, but sharing it with all the operators working in the sector. So it's very useful to try to reason, to fine-tune the expectations, possible questions, and ways in which the mediators, can work or be asked to work. So it's important to renegotiate their position in a way. So I think it was useful to underline again the importance of all the professionals that are there working in this setting. So it's not only important to underline some experiences. So some experiences are quite common. We have some mediators that are very highly specialized, and they are so a figure between the operator and mediator. So we can really enrich this kind of role. And on the other side, we have other setting with two different operator and mediator with different knowledge and skills. How can we differentiate those skills? So those are just suggestions that we should renegotiate in our everyday work, in the social work with the mediators and the operators. And then in the end, well, in these sort of movement coming from inside, so from the role of the operator to the borders or limits of the other professionals. So there is a movement coming from the center toward the outside, and it's a movement that is quite useful also in other settings. So when you just cross the borders, it's useful to just have a look at the center and trying to adopt another point of view. So it was very useful about, the role of mediator. We just made a comparison with another professional. So the interpreter. So we made a comparison between the mediator and the interpreter. So this is something that we normally do when in the trafficking system, and in court, the mediator of the project meets the interpreter that has been assigned by the court. Well, in these occasions, we see that we have some classic concept of mediation. They are very evident. They're quite evident. So the neutrality, so in court, the interpreter that is called by the court and is asked to translate what the various parts, so the victims or the witnesses, they have to, what they have to say. And that can be used by the accusation and by the defender, so, and also the judge, so they can use what they say to understand better what happened, if it's something was legal or not, a crime or not. So the translation in that moment was really a neutral translation. I remember a female judge that was saying you have to translate word by word, but you know it's very difficult really to translate the real meaning of an expression word by word. So this aspect of neutrality is probably one of the most evident aspects, maybe the most trivial aspect. But I thought about the importance of the mediator and or the interpreter. So they have to know the context where he or she is. So not just the institutional context, that is for sure, we said it before, is important, but also the exploitation, so the meaning of exploitation, the various actors, and so on and so forth. So maybe trying to be neutral, so because we think that the interpreter that is called by the court shouldn't know the content, should know really what we are talking about, this can grant a neutrality. On the other hand, maybe knowing some elements can really help the interpreter to translate better. So without the further ado, so without really deepening too much this topic, I think about a remark that a mediator said, a mediator working for our Impacto project said during a break, during really a trial in court. So talking about the difficulties of the legal interpreter to translate in order for all the people present to understand. So he said to me, it's fundamental to translate good, the proper way to understand that the person you are translating maybe is afraid or she is scared. And so maybe I've heard some words in the video of the project Nave. So one mediator talked about the importance of feeling, listening to really feeling the need of the other to be heard and the pain of the other. And I think that this was, it's very complex, this topic. I didn't really think it was possible for me to really talk about everything in a few minutes, but for me, it was important to underline these elements because I think that because of these elements, all the actors in the mediator sectors, in the translation system, in courts, and in the social area, all the actors, they really pay attention, they need to pay attention to the meaning of translation, meaning of mediation, various superposition, among the cultural aspects, linguistic aspects, in order to understand and to manage communication in a coherent way, without just giving all the power to one single actor. And I'll stop here if you agree. Thank you, Davy. I'll just give the floor to Lorenzo straight away. And if you have questions, of course, so you can write in the chat box. We're here for you. Very good afternoon to you all. Thank you for inviting me. I was listening. It was very interesting what you said, because this path, your experience, your project, for me is very interesting. It's an application area of mediation that I really don't know well. I mean, I barely know, I'd say. So I was listening with lots of interest, was really willing to learn from your words. Also, the last speech proved that you are really thinking about this topic far away. I mean, you are really reflecting, you're really thinking about all the practices, all the activities. I've noted some things. So thinking about these experience in this intervention area, and as I said, I barely know it, and making a comparison with other areas, I know more with interventional mediator or cultural linguistic mediator in the last 20 years. Well, I've found some elements, shared elements, and I've noted them down. So there's willingness to participate in the teamwork from part of the mediator, this topic of the proper mediation, to use a proper mediation according to the type of mediation. And once again, we can say that the mediator, when one mediator said to me that the mediator, it's just like a colander, so it's just what you use to take the water out of the pasta. So you use it, you use the mediator like that. So the mediator is perceived as something annoying, and so on and so forth. So these topics, these aspects, I have found in other application areas of mediation, those and others. Well, to be honest, this area, the anti-trafficking really has a specific elements, a strong specific elements. For sure, we have people really that are very fragile, very vulnerable, really victims, but every interventions of mediation has specific features, and mediators know it perfectly. We're working in the health system and schools and prisons, working with the police forces and so on and so forth. Every single area has features. So working in school is not like working in the health system. So probably you need to work to know the school system well, or to know the family well. If you work in the school, you need to have a specific language. You need to know how a specific area works. The same if you work in the anti-trafficking. We have a specific context. We have very fragile victims from a physical and psychological point of view. And so we have also specific procedures when to use a mediator, and the mediator is recognized and has a specific role and specific jobs. Having said that, there are some things I'd like to underline that Gianfranco, Milena, Michela, and Devi, they really underlined and that I've noted down. So you underline many times the topics of neutrality, impartiality, the positioning or the position of the mediator also in the mediation to build a trust. So having said that, so thinking about all that, I mean, there is also a very delicate topic that is really a source of misunderstanding and a topic of national and international research. This topic of the neutrality of the mediator or in the mediation, a topic that all the mediators know perfectly well. They know really perfectly well the meaning of that. Well, in cultural linguistic mediation, and here we have also the experience that you're talking about, is very important here, the role of the mediator in creating a contact, in engaging the migrants that live in the cities. This means that the mediator really visits these people at home. They really need to ask, sorry, can I bother you? Can I just visit you at home? This is valid in all the various mediations and towns. So in streets and in services. So the linguistic and cultural mediators, they cannot be, or they cannot have a social impartial and neutral role. Focus on just facilitating the relation between the services and the victims or the migrants. And it's important to underline here that the mediators, they need to just stay next to the users, to the victims, offering opportunities, maybe small opportunities or possibilities, something available to them. So if in traditional services, the mediators, there is an asymmetry, well, in the mediation, in streets and cities, there is no structure, there's no framework. We just have the mediator, the operator with his or her body, skills, abilities to create a relationship with these migrants or these victims. And having said that, I mean, more than this image of the bridge, and you said that the mediators, so they use this image of the bridge, they represent their job as a sort of bridge, of creating bridge. More than a bridge, the mediator is really crossing rivers. So the river, let's say a river, so these victims, they really need to cross these bridges, moving forward and backwards, moving to the right and to the left, with the help of the mediator. So it's, I mean, it's much more difficult than just crossing a bridge, a simple bridge. So if I had to think about an image, considering your experiences, once again, the mediator is someone that is crossing a bridge with a backpack on the shoulder, the backpack of the skills, the experiences, what he or she had learned. So it's, I mean, it's not possible to cross the bridge without having skills and knowledge for you to be able to identify where you have to really to cross this bridge. So, as I was saying before, so maybe I'm wrong, but from what you said and you presented, the training of mediators, or cultural linguistic mediators, so we need to have a multidisciplinary approach. So the religious beliefs are very important. And as David was saying, I think that these aspects were really taken care for. So the mediators, they need to be able to recognize marginality, problems, to strengthen this ability to read the street, let's say, to read the various languages, considering the context. So we really need to strengthen the ability to work in team, to listen, to observe, to manage everything, to manage situations that are very emotional. So these aspects, you underlined these aspects many times. So here we have a risk of the burnout of the mediators, even more so, and I mean, in low-level services, when you work with marginality, very difficult situations, so you need to sustain, to supervise, and reference team with constant supervision. Even more so in this area that you underline.
However, between the mediation and of this context and traditional mediations, which actually take place within the context of those, let's say, traditional context and services, the difference that we can find is the level of intensity with which these services are presented. So the neutrality, as we said, or the risk for a burnout or other aspects. So the level of intensity. Why am I saying that the difference is this level of intensity? So basically, this is not something completely new, in my opinion. This is not an element which features in an original way the intercultural mediation, because the mediation practices also in the traditional services like the health services, for example, or social services. Well, they say that the social cultural mediator always finds his own strategies to build trust with the service, but also with the foreign user, redefining each time different balances in the interrelational aspect. So moving from one side to the other, and there are many stories about that, of many actions, many operations from our mediators that often tell and explain what happens behind that interaction between three people. So operator, foreign user, and mediator. So these mediators come closer usually to the foreign person. They start a dialogue, they go deeper into details about some topics, they try to build this trust, and there is no longer neutrality at that point, but there is a real participation. They are really close to the condition of those people, to their fears, to their doubts, to their risks as well. And the closer we get to these people, the more we risk to leave those vulnerable aspects. so the more dangerous it is, if we can say that. So they run a risk, they build this trust, and they empower the other person in a certain way by making that step forward and approaching the person they are mediating for. And we can see that in different contexts. Again, in the health field, for example, there are many examples of these stories, and many mediators, I'm sure, also among the people that are present here today, may say the same thing. So this is what actually creates a real risk for a burnout, which cannot be excluded actually, because we know that in the most challenging cases, it's always a real risk. Also in the traditional mediation within the services of the, again, of the traditional contexts. But starting from that action, which is a very brave action from the social cultural mediator, of course, the mediator shall always rely on the know-how and on his cultural and social know-how. Well, at that point, the role of the mediator becomes fundamental, and often it is the way to lead, to be led towards a solution. There are also some further topics that were mentioned earlier during your previous speeches. What I already mentioned about the mediator, which is the most suitable to face some specific situations. So, for example, this is something which is in common also for other contexts. Sorry, there's someone ringing to my door. Let me just say and remind you that if you have any question, please feel free to write down in the chat or ask your questions. Well, I just wanted to add some further remarks about what you said earlier. Maybe I can stop here and maybe we can get back to some further topics later on.
Al momento non ci sono domande, non so se qualcuno magari alza la mano, ma almeno in
At
chat.
present, we don't have any question. So I don't know if someone wants to ask questions in the chat or otherwise, if Lorenzo, if you want to add something, please feel free to add. So don't be shy. If you have any question, please write down on the chat. Also, the NAVE mediators that were very present in during our project, especially during this specific part concerning the mediation, would like to ask about their opinion, or also if they believe we misunderstood something, or if they think there is something worthy to be shared, some remarks they'd like to share with us.
Aggiungo anche una cosa che mi veniva in mente mentre
Let me also add that during my speech and Gianfranco's speech as well, we didn't stress that much the real work on the road, let's say like that. And well, we believe this may require a specific ad hoc speech in order to focus on the peculiarities of this very good image that you shared with us. So basically, you go down on the road and you ask someone if you can kind of annoy them because this is their own personal space. So this is something we lived during our experiences, and this is a very good example to share with all of you. Well, let me add that, again, talking about mediation, let me just tell you what is happening, because, well, the experience that you share with us is framed within a series of initiatives that over the last few years are more and more bringing the mediation outside the service level. So it's kind of getting back to the origins, because the mediation was firstly developed and created during the mid-80s, considering and starting from the French experience. So if we focus on the first conferences at that time and linked to the experience of the Femmes Relais, which who were working in some specific urban areas, which were different from the situation in Italy, because in Italy we actually developed this experience within the services. But our experience, like many other experiences, because there are many similarities, but I know that you in Venice, you are working outside the buildings, the service buildings. So you have a very strong experience of mediation on the road. And this is not the case in many other contexts, believe me, because mainly mediation takes place within the service context. But over the last few years, I see more and more this getting back to the origins. So basically, we're talking about a mediation which is held outside, outdoor, basically outside the service buildings and crossing all the services and the territories. And this is, in my opinion, a very interesting aspect, because this shall be stressed. Why am I saying that? Well, those of you who know the history of mediation perfectly know that over the last 10 years, maybe more than that, but let's say over the last 10 years, the debate about the mediation has kind of stopped. So the relaunching this mediation, there is a need to relaunch this mediation. And we cannot have this debate restarting without a real integration policy, which is again kind of stuck in Italy for at last 10 years. And because we are considering the last documents that are dated about 10 years ago. And again, social and cultural mediation is an inclusion tool which was defined as a constant dimension. So if we don't restart the inclusion policies in Italy, we can't. Also, a tool like mediation, which plays a very important role in terms of inclusion, will hardly be able to be relaunched, because this is perfectly in line with the integration policies. So this relaunching the integration policies is basically relying on the political and economical willingness. So research and development of as well, and development for local communities. So these are all topics which shall be at the core of the national agenda. And unfortunately, at present, I don't see this willingness. So what can I see? What can we see then at this moment? Well, we can say that over the last year, there is a kind of restarting of the debate at the territorial level, at the local level, about the social and cultural mediation. Well, for example, just a few months ago, I took part in a conference. It was a workshop titled From Intercultural to Social Mediation. And I think this experience, this is deeply experienced to, deeply linked to the experience you are sharing with us today. And from a certain point of view, this was focusing on a real evolution for the social and linguistic and cultural mediators, passing through not a new way, but a path which is still to be developed, actually. So a context involving many different multi-ethnic and multi-religious contexts, which shall be more deeply explored, and also the linguistic and cultural mediation because of the way it is framed. It has been framed over the last 30 years. It's been social, cultural mediation as it's been defined by some researchers and some experts in some of their works until the year 2009, where from the top, let's say for linguistic reasons, it was defined as a social cultural mediation, sorry. So this brings to focus on the linguistic and cultural mediator outside the building. So in the urban outdoor, in the on the road, on the squares, in the places where people are actually present. So that's a real social and human need where there are many emotions involved. So fear, danger, and so on. And it's very, very complex, very, very challenging working in this context where there are many aspects being intertwined and there are many different challenges involved, and it's very complicated to separate what is white from what is black, because what actually prevails is the gray color in that case. So an ambiguous aspect which is not very clear. And these are the places where more often we see the most fragile people living, migrants and people that are really in need of this support, people that are often addicted from drugs, alcohol, people without a real, without a home, people within the prostitution network, unaccompanied minors, and so on and so forth. So these are all experiences like your experience that you are sharing with us today that are very important. And there are many similar experiences. I can think about Naples or Turin or other Italian cities where the social cultural mediator is actually involved within these networks with working teams going outside to work. And then there is another aspect which is very important in my opinion, and I'm thinking for example to the cities of Padua or Turin or other cities where the role of the mediator, relying on their huge experiences that they develop within and from the services as well, plays a more and more important role in all the urban areas where there are huge migrant communities with huge challenges in terms of communication between people coming from different cultures, different origins, different religions. And this often creates conflicts, which sometimes will create real problems of exclusions and tensions. So in this case, the mediator is a fundamental and essential resource in order to facilitate the communication, being able to understand what are the main peculiarities and the most complex aspects of these people in this context, in order to understand the context and being able to facilitate the communication, aiming at supporting these people. There are, again, different emotions involved, like fears and so on. So the mediator, once again, can be very, very efficient within the organizational system for the well-being and for living together within a city. And that's why I'm naming again the conference in 2009. And in conclusion, let me just name some further experiences that I actually found all around Italy, and that basically have similarities with this passage from the services, well, from the mediation within the service to the mediation within spaces, open spaces. So basically involving the services and the territory. So there are different modes to consider the mediator basically living and working within these areas, within these spaces, and they are basically managed by those people relying on a background of know-how they developed with the on the basis of their relationship with migrants. And in these cases, for example, the goal is to provide this service not only to provide communication services, but also to link, to address to groups of foreign people that usually do not have access to structures, either because they don't know the structures or because they are scared about that. So basically, they create links, they create opportunities, trying to motivate, to push these people to become more and more independent. And this kind of roles, this kind of figures have been involved within projects, for example, of training to people or teaching them Italian language, for example. And it's very, very challenging to involve these migrants very often. And let's think, for example, to the experience that has been developed in some areas in order to involve the so-called health community trainers. And in this case, the example was taken by the British model, and these people, these trainers, these educators are adult people coming from foreign countries that play roles and functions as a mediator very close and collaborating with people involved in the social health services. So basically, they promote the participation to the health services inside and outside the building, the structure. So basically, directly going where migrants are living, for example, where the health operators alone won't be able to go. So through this empowerment process, through this peer education process, aiming at promoting good health and healthy practices, and aiming at achieving good health conditions, they are involved, these people, these mediators, in order to try to create a link with the users. And amongst the experiences that were developed in Italy, very often these educators were involved in order to, in some cases, for example, manage and to deal with the topic of the abortion, or for prevention against the use of alcohol or drugs, or for all those topics and contexts where the participation of these migrants was very, very low. So all these experiences clearly show how important it is, the mediation role, which is actually based on the way these people create a network, create a link inside and outside the service building. And of course, this requires further study, further research in order to better understand the peculiarities of this role of this people, of this figure. But it is clear how there may be new job opportunities, for example, for mediators, and they can even strengthen the development of a more complex and challenging situation. So I believe that this shift of mediation from the service building to the outdoor, to the outside context, in my opinion, may have space for further development. Of course, there are specific constraints which are essential and which are part of the role of the mediator, because they are providing a service, a functional service within a service, which may be either a school service, a social service, a health service, or whatever. So it's very, very challenging for sure. So I'd like to say that there is this trend to get back to the origins, as I was saying, as it was firstly considered and conceived the mediation. And here I think there may be an interesting development for the mediation, and the experience you are sharing with us today confirms that. Let me just finish by saying that we shall bring mediation back to the national attention, and we can do that only from the bottom. So mediators, of course, but also services and experiences like your experience, where I guess there may be some indications about some interesting policies, shall, in my opinion, work in collaboration with other similar experiences in order, again, to bring back to the national level the topic of mediation.
Grazie mille Lorenzo. Non so se siamo tutti silenziosi perché ci hai dato...
So thank you, Lorenzo. I really don't know if we are silent because apart from Edwin and Giancarlo, maybe we are silent because you really gave to us a lot of food for thought. But once again, I want to ask you if you have questions. We have more or less 10 minutes. Then we need to close also because of our interpreters. So I'd like to thank our interpreters because we're talking about interpreters. So Letizia Moro, I'll just read her message too. About what we said, I agree that the proximity interventions cannot be neutral, because for those involved in personally, so proximity and neutrality in social faith just anonymous. So those proximity intervention, for example, like with drug addicts. So thank you for your intervention. I cannot participate personally because my connection is really terrible. Thank you for your comments, Letizia. And of course, we do know how it works with terrible connections. Well, in reality, I mean, you should be able at least to open your microphone. You should be in the same room. So if you open your microphone, you should be able to hear you. Can you hear me? Yes, we do. So I have a few problems with the connection. So good evening to you all. Thank you. Good evening, Lorenzo, Edvi. Nice to see you again. Gabriella has been working for years in the mediation, so please introduce yourself. So good afternoon. I work in the Verona province and I have been working for years in linguistic cultural mediation sector. I think I am one of those who really developed really the instruments of mediation in the Verona province, sharing part of the path of the journey with Gianfranco and with the Professor Luati. So I think that for sure, first of all, thank you for the suggestions and for having the idea, Michela, to start from the perception, self-perception of mediators, women and men. I think that this research you have done really has an added value and is helping us to understand and to interact and develop a shared path, a shared journey to really legitimate this profession of the cultural mediator. After many years, I see that we go back again to say that because the mediator is not a defined profession, so the work, the job of the mediator is quite weak. Promoting the mediator and the mediation in the services is very difficult. The development skills of the mediators is very challenging, and we need to define, probably to define prerequisites and skills that we know that are very much needed. We should do this. I really, really love someone to help us to aggregate, us to create an interest, how to really underline this need and how to impose and propose this need to create and define these characteristics of the mediator. I agree with Duarte when she said that unless we relaunch the integration policies, we will not be able to talk about the social and cultural mediation as the formalization point of view. But once again, on the other side, we really need to have a specific profession if you want it to be recognized formally. We just listed in various documents. So once again, I think there is this need to gather all these pieces of the puzzle, these suggestions. I'd like to know from Luati if he thinks that it's possible, because I'd like to meet with other stakeholders, so mediator organizations and universities, that they are working on this professional profile hand in hand or in parallel, without really using the traditional formation courses. They are there in the territory. So I'm thinking about financing funds. They always really focus on the importance of the mediator, but I really think there is someone missing that really helps us to just improve the quality, to leap forward. We still lack this really this bridge in a will. Maybe Professor Luati can help us in that. Thank you. Hi, Gabriella. Gabriella, hi. I really remember you perfectly and all the journey that we shared together, all the reflections and the thought about this theme. I have a couple of things to say, and then Gianfranco and the others can add something else. As you know, you all know perfectly well, we had different seasons in the cultural linguistic and culture mediation. So we had associations or trade unions at the beginning of the first 10 years of the 90s. So we had a lot of attention around this profile with documents that were drafted. Also, the important start of a process to recognize this professional profile that was concluded in 2013. I mean, partially concluded in 2013 with the interinstitutional working group of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and then it stopped there. So we arrived in 2013 with the inertia and not much more. Well, the service of mediation, as I was saying before, the mediation, intercultural mediation service and social mediation service are one next to the other, considering the work of the INAP, the National Institute for the Analysis of the Politics. So the profile of the intercultural mediator is really specific for the mediation in services with migrants, as we have said for many years, while the social mediator is more focused on a mediation outside, let's say, outdoor, as I said before. So these two profiles, I should say, they are not inside, or they're not considered really framed and regulated professions that we have in our Atlas and Profession Handbook in Italy. And so the access and this kind of job are really certified. They need to be certified and have specific regulation. But we knew that, that we do not have a specific form of recognition for this mediator job. So what about the reasons why this process stopped in 2013? So we were gathering different provinces and regions. So the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Conference of States and Regions. I really don't know, if I have to be honest. It was stopped for the reasons I was talking about before, because we didn't really have integration policies, and we had other emergencies, different crises. So first of all, we really need to wonder if this is the right path to follow after so many years of working and asking for a recognized formal profile. We should ask ourselves, is this the right path? Are we willing? And I think we're not willing to follow this path, the government. Because if we recognize that the mediator, so one side we really legitimate, we recognize the mediator, but on the other side we can make this profile, let's say, more rigid, because we need specific certification and diplomas and so on and so forth. Let's think how we could be, or we could really have managed, or we could manage the crisis of the refugees with these stiff procedures for mediators. So we making this professional category more rigid. It's complex. considering that migrations are very mobile, very different, they change in time, year after year. So this is really a question mark, the first question mark. Is it meaningful to just follow this path of the national recognition? Because there are consequences. And on the other aspect, I do think that apart from that, everything they have done with the mediators during the refugees crisis and the 2 years of the COVID pandemic, in the experiences, I know mediators really contributed in an exceptional way. I know very well the school sector and the health sector. In these 2 years, the mediators have been fundamental and paramount for young boys and girls and families with the remote schooling or in hospitals. I do think that there is also another difficulty to underline this contribution. I haven't read in international and national newspapers something about the importance of the mediators during the pandemic in these 2 years. I do think that we can start again from, let's say, local level in order, first of all, to ask for more stability for mediators in the services, in the working groups and the various equipes. Because in some territories, this is a de facto situation. In many other territories, the majority of the territories, there is no stability. So I would work at city level, provincial level, local level, to give to these mediators more stability, a stronger presence, considering the fundamental contribution they are giving inside the working groups. But it's not up to the mediators to ask more stability to be recognized. It's not up to them. The others, the institution, they should ask the presence of the mediators inside their institution. Then we have also historical problems. So we talk about the interpreter and mediator, they belong to the same family. They do something similar and other very different things. But keep on saying that there is a contraposition between mediation, so professional mediation, and those that are they have a university diploma. We need really to work together to share strengths and not to be divided. I really don't have an answer for your question. But what can I say? There is just a new attention toward these professions, not coming from the institutional level, but from the territories. So Ravenna, Florence, and other territories, they are really working to give more stability to mediators, to this service. And I think I don't really trust the institutions, and I trust much more the territories, what they are doing to really give stability to these experiences and to this profile of the mediator. Well, to conclude, just one last comment, Michela. Sorry, Gianfranco, sorry to interrupt you. Just 1 minute more, because we really need to conclude. It's up to me to say that we need to conclude, but then we can meet again for sure. Because Mike, one of the participants from England, is saying that it's a not very well known topic, so it should be useful to talk about this. Well, I just want to thank you all for all these suggestions, and I really hope we can really take all these suggestions into consideration and be contagious, let's say, for our colleagues. And I conclude, I just give the floor to Gianfranco. Thank you. Thank you, David. Just a flash. Thank you for the images, for what David says. So there's San Cristobal just in the middle of the river, as Lorenzo said. So just a couple of things very briefly. First of all, we have seen all these changes also in the mediation and the anti-trafficking. So also the phenomena are changing, the trafficking is changing, migration is changing, and the effort that to move toward the more social or social external mediation is really answering to this change of our in the migration in the cities, and then answering to Gabriella. Who are we working with, or can we work with? I do think that the answer of the services, the operators is there, but it's just too much inside the institutions. It's just too close inside the institution without a voice. So we have activists, for example, they're there, and sometimes they need to be mixed to talk about more technical and professional topics. And then let's remember that there are the migrants, so the activism in our areas has a new meaning, a new visibility, and is very much linked also with these very technical topics in a certain sense. Thank you, Gianfranco. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you all for your presence for this very rich webinar. I really hope to see you very soon because there are a lot of topics to talk about. Have a nice evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.